People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. We like to think we're logical creatures, but even with two brains, we're anything but logical. Think of a time where you made a decision that you couldn't justify or articulate through words or logic.
Choice. You can have the boat or the mystery box.
I'll take the box.
Like the time I stepped out of my dad's car in a university car park for an open day. I was destined to go to Loughborough University, the best sporting university in the country by a mile. So successful in sport that if Loughborough was a country in the last Olympics, they would have finished 15th, above the likes of Spain, Jamaica, and Uzbekistan.
Uzbekistan!
If I wanted to work with elite athletes, which I did more than anything, preferably the GB boxing Olympic team, then it made total sense that I pursued my aspirations of becoming a lead strength and conditioning coach by studying there. That was until I arrived in the car park for an open day at Nottingham Trent University. I'd been blown away by the facilities at Loughborough University earlier in the year. But when I left the car park at Nottingham Trent University, I was about to listen to the course leader, Chris, deliver a speech that would change where I would spend the next 3 years of my life. My wife often laments how dreadful my facial recognition is, so much so that she's told me that if she was in a lineup of 10 white blonde women, then I would struggle to pick her out. Yeah, I can still remember the talk and Chris's shiny bald head and immaculate navy suit to this day.
To this day!
Whether he realised it or not, Chris's opening line sealed my university fate. Chris stepped up to deliver his first sentence of the Sports Science and Management BSc sales pitch, looking like an unassuming man, but the confidence he projected in his voice was anything but, and I was hooked from his opening line. I could start by telling you how other courses prepare students with the idealisms of textbooks rather than the chaos of the real world. But the reality is, you already made your mind up in the car park. Nothing I can say in the next 10 or so minutes will sway you otherwise. If you didn't have that gut feel in the car park, leave now, because Nottingham Trent is not the right university for you. And he was right. I can't tell you a single fact or figure about any of the universities I'd considered during my UCAS application. And even though I was aware of the statistic with Loughborough University and the Olympics, the reality was I even had to cross-reference that with Google to double check that I had it correct. But I remember the course leader's pitch and about having the gut feeling and that he spoke about, even though that was over a decade ago. Successful storytelling allows you to tap into areas of the brain that facts and figures alone just can't reach. They can help sway everything from business decisions
You're hired.
to who you end up spending your life with. If numbers alone could sell us on a decision, we wouldn't have overweight doctors, burnt out life coaches, or divorced marriage counselors. So, because storytelling can impact everything from your success at work to your romantic life to your side hustle, it makes sense that we learn how to do it properly. Before we get on to those optional storytelling techniques, we're going to talk about a few things that are mandatory. Humor is optional,
One you are?
but stakes are non negotiable. Stakes are the reason that people listen to stories. There's no amount of well crafted storytelling techniques can make up for a story without high enough stakes. This brings us on to mistake number one. People think that the best stories involve something incredible happening to you.
7:30 this morning, a dismembered body, as yet unidentified, was discovered by a Mr. Michael Shipman.
But typically they don't. It's about 5-second moments and relatability. So, rule number one of great storytelling is that regardless of how long the story is from start to finish, every story ultimately comes down to a 5-second moment. These 5-second moments are the moments in your life when something changes forever. Now, this might sound grandiose, but it can be something as simple as your long held view of something changing. Maybe you never wanted kids, and what initially seemed like an insignificant moment has suddenly made you realize that you do. Maybe you always dreamt of a certain role or title, and when you finally get it, you realize that it wasn't all it cracked up to be. These are just two examples, and it seems fitting to highlight a prime example of 5-second moments and relatability in the final of the 2023 version of The Apprentice. Whilst Rochelle had those with afro hair nodding along, it wasn't quite relatable to those who perhaps had never personally had those struggles themselves. Now, if I was to tell a story about me winning my amateur boxing debut, because not many people have stepped through the ropes of the squared circle,
You can't square a circle.
most people aren't really going to know what that's like. But most people do know what it's like to desperately want something more than anything else. I can't help but think that Rochelle would have been better off zooming out from the idea of hair, which is what she does, and shared more about a story that centered on her not feeling included. Now, not everyone will know what it's like to have afro hair, but you're not human if you've never experienced rejection.
Decision. It's the blue corner. Sinek.
Now let's talk about structuring your story. Your 5-second moment is your end point. It's the reason the audience wants to hear your story. And everything that goes before your 5-second moment should act to bring clarity to this moment. I mentioned earlier that we could manipulate a story, and one of the reasons that we do this is to bring the greatest possible clarity to that 5-second moment. Storytelling techniques are what make the everyday exciting. Anyone can tell a reasonable story with a high enough stake. But how do we engage people with the everyday? How do we captivate an audience whose attention is elsewhere? Enter the following techniques, courtesy of one of the world's best storytellers, Matthew Dix. The elephant. If someone was carrying an excess of over 100 pounds of body fat and they asked me to design the perfect program to deliver on their goal of the first chin-up, we would do well to heed the advice of legendary coach Dan John. Don't ignore the obvious. The elephant in the room.
Boom! Elephant in the room.
Is the problem that we can all see, and it should be introduced in the story as early as possible. In episode 3 of Show Your Work, I mentioned that family and friends of mine hate my stories because I pinball from pillar to post, and it's probably easier to keep up with the latest Chelsea squad list than it is one of my stories. Family, friends, and even co-workers might listen to you out of politeness, but when you haven't built the rapport with someone, for example, telling a story to an interview panel, or trying to convince someone who's never met you before to buy your goods and services, you need to get a story moving as quickly as possible. Or should I say, you need to get moving in your story as quickly as possible. Matthew Dix recommends starting your story with movement wherever possible. This gives us the indirect impression that the story is metaphorically and literally moving somewhere. We're into the story and we're going somewhere. This technique is called the backpack, and it's all about getting people to feel the weight of the problem you're facing, giving them your very literal baggage, so to speak. The word empathy means that you can put someone or put yourself in someone else's shoes, whilst good storytelling is about the act of being able to transport someone into yours. At the start of my story earlier in this video, I explained that I wanted to work with elite athletes and that Loughborough University were the most successful university at sport. I probably should have included how I was in awe of Loughborough's facilities, and maybe I could have contrasted this with the rough and readiness of the spit and sawdust boxing gym that I represented as an amateur. This might have helped you fully understand how much logical sense it would have made for me to go to Loughborough University. Breadcrumbs. The next technique is called breadcrumbs. This is where you're going to sprinkle something that hints at the future. With breadcrumbs, you're providing the audience just enough information to keep them guessing. My favourite example of a breadcrumb is something that I remember being captivated by at 6 years old.
Fearsome predator of the Jurassic is watching his prey. Peering through the water, the carnivore fixes on his unwary victim, waiting for the perfect moment to strike.
The whole point of the previous 3 techniques was to provoke curiosity, to build tension, and ultimately raise the stakes prior to that big reveal.
Could be anything.
Without the above techniques, this next one is pointless. The aim of this technique is to slow time right down. That's why we call it the hourglass. There's no rizzle kicking our way out of this one.
Skip to the good bit.
We want to drag that weight out as long as possible. You might have noticed my attempts to do this in the story I told you in the opening part of the video.
Rewind.
I said, whether he realised it or not, Chris's opening line sealed my university fate. I then proceeded to describe details about Chris that added nothing to the story. Let me know in the comments whether or not you think this tactic of slowing time down worked, or whether you were all pro-green by this point. Bonus point if you're keeping up with the 90s musical references. Crystal ball. A crystal ball is a false prediction made by a storyteller to cause the audience to wonder if that prediction will prove to be true. I started my university story by telling you how I was destined to go to Loughborough University, and I waxed lyrical about how the university's sporting success was better than the likes of Spain, Jamaica, and Uzbekistan.
Uzbekistan!
All of this was done to give you the false impression that I was going to end up at Loughborough University. Even in scripting this story in the video, I initially drafted the story with me starting out getting out of the car at Nottingham Trent University, but then I changed this to remove the words Nottingham Trent to make you think that the university I rocked up at was indeed Loughborough. As I said in the opening part of this video, the difference between storytelling and lying.
You're a terrible liar. It was you.
Is that lying involves adding details that were never there. I tactically removed the detail of which university I'd arrived at for the sake of a mini plot twist when I finished my story. To sum up these 5 techniques, I deliberately chose to share my experience of attending a Nottingham Trent University Open Day to showcase the power of these storytelling techniques. I mentioned in the introduction to these techniques that anyone can tell a reasonable enough story if the stakes are high enough. Me saying I went to Nottingham Trent Open Day is as much of a story as me saying I went to Morocco. Neither of them are stories in of themselves, because at the moment you don't know what the stakes are. There's no moment of transformation. There's no moment of realization. There's no fundamental change in you as a person. Now, you might think that stories must or have to involve exotic locations or unbelievable events, or that everybody desperately wants to hear about your kids or your holiday. Spoiler alert, they don't. But unless something happened that fundamentally changed your life, these aren't stories. At best, they're anecdotes or observations. So how do we take the everyday and make it entertaining? Our storytelling techniques give us a lens to filter our story.
Number 1, number 2.
But we can't fabricate it. We can't make it up. Even with the whys and the hows of storytelling, we still need a what. By now, you have the storytelling techniques, and you know the why of storytelling.
Is that people don't buy what you do, people buy why you do it.
But as I told you earlier, all the story techniques in the world can't polish a story without high enough stakes. So how do we mine our lives for those story-worthy moments?
I think I found something.
If put on the spot, most people might be able to tell one story.
One time at band camp.
But what if I told you that not only is the one story that people choose to tell almost certainly the wrong one, but
So the end of the story is you had to kiss the guy for 20 seconds.
Yes!
also that every day you're alive, you have a story worth telling, provided you know how to look for it. This is where Matthew Dix's Homework for Life comes in. The purpose of Homework for Life is not for you to rewrite a moment in your day verbatim, but rather to force you to progressively summarize the element of your day that is the most story-worthy. There are many ways that you can decide how to track your stories. Personally, I've been using Notion, who are not sponsoring this video, one day. But the reason why I use Notion is because when you're trying to create a new habit, you're much more likely to be successful with it if you anchor it to something that you're already doing. This is known as habit stacking, and you can learn more about that in the video I made about why your habits are failing, which I'll link down below. Notion is where I already complete my 5-minute journal, and the story of the day has become something that I've created as an extension as part of this process. Now, as I said, you might think that not every single day has a story-worthy moment, but it's not necessarily about the amazing thing that happened to you.
It seems as if an asteroid or some kind of meteorite has just hit ground right outside the Mark Twain chili cook-off.
already covered is where most people go wrong with stories, but it's about a moment of realization, relatability, or transformation, or as I found out in today's story of the day, a combination of all three. As I was scripting this specific section of the video, it was nearly 5:30 on a Wednesday afternoon. I'd barely moved 50 steps all day, and I've only got changed out my dressing gown for the purposes of recording this video, which you'll find out why in a moment this hat is on. Only yesterday, I was signed off work with a viral infection, and as someone who never takes days off, I felt awful knowing that my colleagues were having to deal with a higher than normal workload in order to cover up my absence. I even text my line manager to thank him and the rest of the department for doing so. For the entirety of my working life, I've refused to take days off, regardless of how ill I felt. And on the rare days that I actually am ill, I've never even so much as taken paracetamol.
Oh, sorry.
And for whatever reason, I've never really questioned where this assumption comes from, but I've always thought that my colleagues would think less of me for taking a day off and would be frustrated at having to cover the lack of work. Maybe it's the fact that my mum loves harping on about her 100% attendance at school and the fact that this is something she still clings on to. Maybe that's
To this day.
subconsciously got into my psyche. I don't know. Like I said, I can't really explain why I'm also so anti paracetamol. My wife has to practically pin me down to make me take it on the odd occasion where I can actually be forced round to the doctors to see someone about a potential illness. My granddad, God bless his soul, died of a sudden heart attack, which could have certainly been avoided had he actually been to see the doctors. So maybe it's a genetic thing, maybe it's a stubbornness of being a man. I don't really know. It's almost like I think that taking paracetamol, never mind a day off, is somehow like me admitting defeat. Again, maybe it's an overinflated ego from my boxing days. Who knows? And it wasn't until today that that thought process changed. The text I received back from my line manager after thanking him uh, for his hard work, as well as the rest of the departments, was said. I basically said to him, "Look, I'll drag myself into work tomorrow." He said, "Don't drag yourself anywhere. If you're sick, you're sick. It's nice that you feel bad about it, but most people don't." Reading his message made me think, actually, you know what? I don't feel bad at all. I feel great. Well, that's not strictly true. I feel quite sick at the moment. But I mean, I feel great that for once I've prioritized my own health and well being. And I realized that despite what complex I've got going on in my head, there's no bonus hero points that I'm going to get for marching myself to work and potentially making my colleagues even more unwell as a result of it. So, by recording your story of the day as part of your homework for life, you'll be able to reflect back on what otherwise would have been seemingly insignificant moments. Now, whilst I'm by no means on death's door, the reality is if I did drop down dead, or at the very least was incapacitated and unable to work, my employer would replace me within a week. So why for so many years have I compromised my health, and as I said, arguably that of my colleagues, by insisting on always going into work, regardless of how ill I've been? Another unique aspect of Homework for Life is that it seems to slow time down. As I said earlier, it also gives you the better chance to mine stories that you can reflect on. Even better than that, you now have a collection of what made today different moments. At the start of this video, I explained that I could still picture my sports science and management lecturer with crystal clear clarity from well over 10 years ago. But ask me what's happened in that 10 years, and yeah, I can come up with a handful of memories, but considering it's been 10 years, nowhere near as many as what I'd like. By completing Homework for Life, you have something that no one will ever be able to take away from you. A daily record of your roller coaster for life. What could be more worthwhile than having that to look back on your deathbed? Now, in future content, I'm going to be unpacking several things, but I'd like you to help me decide what should be next. In the book that inspired today's video, Storyworthy, Matthew Dix explained that he knew he would win a Moth Slam storytelling competition the moment he saw the competitor, who was supposed to be his biggest rival that day, practicing hand gestures for his story. for future videos, I'm going to take one of the many pearls of wisdom from Adam Ashton and Adam Jones's book that they never taught you and stop scripting these videos. I'm going to do my best to also eliminate these somewhat forced hand gestures. Now, you might not have seen me look down at some notes, but that's because I'm actually reading the script that's on the screen. Something else that's in the shit they never taught you, excuse my French, book, it talks about not scripting videos when you're trying to either practice public speaking or, as I'm doing now, delivering a talk that's going to be on YouTube. They say that as soon as you start scripting, rather than telling a story, what you actually begin to do is start literally reading the script. Now, in public speaking, for me, that's an awful idea because nobody wants someone talking down to their notes. But in YouTube videos, if you're trying to convey emotion, which is obviously a key part of storytelling, then you having to be reliant on reading a script is not going to help. Now, even as I've said that, I've kind of gone off piece because even though there's a script in front of me, I feel like I'm doing a more natural job of doing this. Whereas if you look back earlier in the video, you'll see points where I was stumbling across my words because I was literally reading for exact words. So by the time you're listening to this as a podcast or viewing it as a video, I'll have edited hopefully the next video in the series. Now, there's 3 options that I'd like you to pick from, and let me know in the comments which you would like most. So those options are an as yet undecided clickbaity title on decision making, why following your passion will make you miserable, and finally, how to learn any skill in under 24 hours. Those are your 3 options. Let me know which one of those piques your interest most by leaving your opinion in the comment section. Like and subscribe for my ego, the algorithm, and more content to help you retire before 50 whilst enjoying a life you love on the way there.